My name is Nora Ellis. I'm 30 years old, and I plan events for people who mistake perfection for love. But nothing prepared me for the performance my own mother gave at my wedding. Hook. The moment my mom smiled, I knew she wasn't proud. She was performing. Everyone in the ballroom turned when she took the mic. Chandeliers glowed above us. Laughter floated like perfume, and for one fleeting second, I believed I was finally enough for her. Then she said it. "We're passing the car that his parents gave you. It belongs with real success now." The crowd clapped as if cruelty were generosity. My husband's family smiled politely, not realizing my mother had just stripped me bare in front of 300 guests. I stood there in my white gown, frozen between the music and the shame, thinking, this is what love sounds like in my family. Applause after betrayal. Later that night, I found a small velvet box in my suite. Inside weren't diamonds, just car keys tied to a torn photo of a man I didn't recognize. On the back, my mother's handwriting. "You took his daughter. Now take his secret." That's when I realized her real wedding gift wasn't the car. It was the truth about why my father never came home. If this story hit your heart, tap subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your words keep these stories alive. Is your own name. After the reception ended, the music faded, but my anger stayed. The ballroom still smelled of roses and spilled champagne, yet every breath burned with humiliation. My mother's toast replayed in my head, her words echoing louder than the applause that followed. I found her outside beneath the fairy lights, pretending to text someone important. I asked why she did it. She smiled softly, like she was granting me a favor, and said it was symbolic, a gesture to show grace. She called it elegant. I called it betrayal. Inside, my husband's family laughed, calling her generous, saying how classy it was. They didn't see the way my throat closed when she handed over the keys, or the way my mother avoided my eyes as if guilt could vanish under chandeliers. When the last guest left, I locked myself in the bridal suite. My gown lay in a pile on the floor, the white silk now heavy and cold. I wiped the mascara from my cheeks, wondering if love always demanded this kind of silence. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Drew Bennett, my childhood friend. He had sent a photo. A red convertible, old Buell-kept PT, parked under a flickering streetlight. Beneath it, one line. "Didn't your dad drive one like this before he disappeared?" My heart stopped. The car looked identical. Same shape, same paint, same license plate pattern. 2 letters stamped into the metal EE, my father's initials. I hadn't seen him since I was 12, the year he vanished. They said it was an accident, that no one ever found the car. I zoomed in on the photo until it blurred. My hands trembled. I tried calling Drew, but he didn't answer. The silence on the line was thicker than any truth I could imagine. Hours later, the night outside turned gray. I sat by the window, still in my wedding veil, watching the city lights flicker like fading promises. My phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number, though I already knew who it was. "Don't ask about the car. It has already cost us one family." I stared at the screen, the words pressing into me like cold fingerprints. My mother's voice was in those lines, calm, final, warning me not to dig deeper. But that's the thing about buried secrets. The harder you try to hide them, the louder they call your name. I looked down at my reflection in the dark glass. The bride everyone clapped for was gone. The woman staring back was someone else entirely. Someone ready to find out what really happened to her father. That night, I realized the wedding wasn't the start of my new life. It was the sequel to the one my mother tried to erase. Some gifts come wrapped in guilt, not ribbon. The morning after the wedding, I couldn't look at my mother's face without feeling like I was staring at someone else's lie. Her text from the night before burned in my mind. "Don't ask about the car." But curiosity doesn't listen to warnings. It feeds on them. She had a storage unit on the east side of town, one I remembered only because she made me promise never to go there. I still had the spare key from years ago, taped inside an old jewelry box. I drove there that afternoon, the smell of dust and oil hitting me as I opened the metal door. Inside were boxes stacked like memories she didn't want to unpack. Holiday decorations, photo albums, and the kind of old furniture that used to fill our living room before Dad disappeared. I dug through them, half hoping to find nothing, half praying to find everything. At the bottom of a plastic crate, beneath faded wrapping paper and yellowed receipts, I found it. A small leather notebook tied with a broken red ribbon. Across the cover, in her handwriting, were the words, "Gift Ledger." I opened it. Each page listed something she had given me. My first laptop, my college tuition, even the down payment on my apartment. Every entry had a dollar amount next to it, and beneath that the same word was written in red ink. Repaid. Repaid by whom? My stomach tightened as I turned the pages faster. The handwriting grew shakier the further I went, as if she'd been writing while crying. Near the middle, I found an entry that stopped me cold. Convertible, settled by the Yeed family, 2012. My hands trembled. 2012. That was the year I graduated from college. The same summer, the police officially declared my father deceased. The same year, Mom started working 2 jobs and told me not to ask about finances again. Why would a family named Reed repay a car? And what did they have to do with my father's disappearance? I flipped through the remaining pages, heart pounding. The last entry wasn't a gift. It was a statement. Everything has been settled. Nothing owed. But tucked in the back cover, hidden beneath the binding, was a small folded note. The paper was thin and brittle, like something that had been read too many times. I pulled it out carefully, unfolding it with my fingers shaking. The handwriting wasn't my mother's. It was rough, uneven, masculine. The first payment came from his father. I stared at the words until they blurred. His father, not hers. Not mine. His. Who was his? My father? Someone else's? Someone she'd protected all these years? The air in the storage unit grew heavy, the metal walls pressing in. I could almost hear my mother's voice echoing through the silence, telling me to leave it alone. But there was no turning back now. Because some debts don't stay settled. They just change names. My mother didn't keep memory. She kept receipts. The next morning, I drove across town to Adam's parents' house. It wasn't a visit. It was reconnaissance. Elaine Reed greeted me in her usual warm, practiced way, the kind that made people forget she'd built her reputation on perfection. Her home looked like a magazine cover, polished floors, fresh lilies, and too much order to feel alive. I smiled and played the polite daughter-in-law. We talked about the wedding, the gifts, and the future. Then I asked the question. That red convertible, the one everyone said your family gifted us? Where did it really come from? Elaine's smile trembled, just for a second. Her hand brushed the pearl necklace at her throat like it might protect her. She said they'd bought it back, years ago, after some kind of misunderstanding. Called it a gesture of closure between families. Closure for what? I pressed. Her eyes darted toward the hallway, the one leading to her husband's study. She hesitated, then sighed and motioned for me to follow. Inside, the air felt older, heavier, like secrets had soaked into the wood. She opened a drawer and pulled out a thin envelope labeled 2012. Inside was a single piece of paper, a bank draft. The logo at the top reads First National of West Haven. The payee line said Reed Family Holdings. The amount was precise, $32,000. The signature at the bottom stopped my breath. Edward Ellis, my father's name. My throat went dry. I traced the ink with my finger. The swooping E, the firm slant of the second one, the same initials I'd seen on the car's license plate. Elaine spoke softly, almost apologetically. Your father settled a debt that wasn't his. That car was involved in a scandal years ago, something your mother wanted forgotten. I looked up sharply. What kind of scandal? She hesitated. Her voice thinned. I don't know the details. I just know your father came here one night late. He said he wanted to make things right. The next day, the money appeared. And then he was gone. I felt my heartbeat echoing in my ears. He didn't die. He disappeared. Maybe he wasn't running from an accident. Maybe he was running from her. Elaine reached across the table and covered my hand. Nora, you should let this go. It's not your burden. But it was. It had been mine since the day my mother smiled on that wedding stage. I folded the draft and slipped it into my purse. I thanked her, pretending I wasn't shaking inside. As I walked out to my car, the late afternoon sun hit the hood of the red convertible parked by the curb. For the first time, I noticed the reflection clearly. 2 letters on the license plate glinting in silver. E.E. The same as the signature I'd just seen. My father's mark, staring back at me from the car my mother said wasn't ours. And suddenly I understood why she told me not to ask about it. And because the car wasn't just a gift. It was a confession on wheels. The dead don't leave messages unless they want to be heard. 2 nights after finding the ledger, I went back to the storage unit. The air smelled heavier this time, like the past had been waiting for me. I brought a flashlight and gloves, determined to go through every box until I understood what my mother was hiding. Halfway through, I found a cracked leather briefcase with my father's initials pressed into the corner. Inside were old insurance papers, tax forms, and something smaller wedged in the pocket, a gray flip phone, the kind people stopped using 15 years ago. I stared at it, heart pounding. When I pressed the power button, the screen flickered to life. The battery is low but still working. My reflection flashed on the tiny screen as the phone buzzed once. One new voicemail. My breath caught. I pressed play. The voice was faint but unmistakable. My father. Valerie, if they find out, it's over. The car isn't a gift. It's evidence. Static filled the rest. My hand shook so hard I almost dropped the phone. He sounded terrified. And he had said her name. Valerie. My mother. I replayed the message twice, straining to hear anything beyond the crackling audio. The words were clear enough. The car wasn't a gift. It was evidence. Evidence of what? Fraud? Theft? Murder? Tears blurred the screen. I hadn't heard his voice since I was a child. It sounded older now, worn out by secrets I was never meant to know. I dug deeper into the briefcase and found receipts from the same year he disappeared in 2012. One showed a towing service. One town over, dated the night before. The police said his car went off the road. The pieces didn't fit, but they were beginning to form a shape. I scrolled through the phone, desperate for more clues. The call history was wiped clean, the messages empty. Only the voicemail remained, sealed in digital amber. I checked the timestamp. My pulse stopped. The message had been recorded one day before the accident report. The day before his so-called death. My father hadn't just died. He'd been silenced. I turned off the phone and held it in my lap, staring into the dark corner of the unit. Somewhere between the boxes and the dust, I could almost feel him there. Not haunting me, but warning me. If they find out, it's over. Who were they? And how far would my mother go to make sure I never became one of them? The air inside the storage unit grew cold. My flashlight flickered once, then died completely. For a moment, the only sound was my heartbeat. Fast, uneven, alive. I wasn't scared anymore. I was furious, because now I had proof that the dead don't stay silent. Not when the truth is still waiting to be heard. You can erase a name from a gravestone, not from history. The next clue came from something most people would overlook. A faint stamp in the corner of the torn photograph I'd found with the car keys. It read Halverson Studio, Pinebrook. The letters were faded, almost gone, but still enough to follow. The town was 2 hours away, a place so small the main street looked like a postcard from a decade that never ended. When I pushed open the door to Halverson Studio, a bell rang above me. The smell of developer fluid and old wood hit me instantly. Behind the counter sat an older man with wire-rimmed glasses, sorting negatives by hand. I showed him the photograph. The red convertible. The man with his arm resting casually on the door. My father. The man's eyes widened slightly. He didn't need to look long. He remembered. He said that the photo was part of an insurance file, a documentation shoot for a claim filed years ago on that very car. He kept his records organized by year and pulled out a yellowed envelope labeled Vehicle Documentation 2011. Inside was a carbon copy of the insurance record. My pulse quickened as I read the names. Owners, Edward Ellis and Harold Reed. My father, and Adam's grandfather. The room tilted slightly. The Reeds, the same family my husband came from, had co-owned that car with my father. Whatever business they'd shared was more than friendship. It was money. It was history. The photographer leaned against the counter, watching my reaction. He said the car had been photographed for proof of condition before a big claim was filed. Then, a month later, a woman came back demanding that the negatives be destroyed. I looked up. A woman. He nodded slowly. Red hair, pearls, sharp voice. He remembered her name because she paid him in cash and made him sign a non-disclosure form that never made sense. Valerie Ellis. My mother. I felt my throat close. My mother had known. She'd known everything. The car, the insurance claim, the shared ownership, the missing man. She hadn't been protecting me. She'd been protecting herself. I asked the photographer if he still had the negatives. He shook his head, said he burned them, just like she told him to. But his eyes flickered with something uncertain. Maybe guilt, maybe memory. As I turned to leave, he called after me, his voice gravelly and soft. Miss, if you're digging into that car, you should be careful. Some pictures were never meant to be developed. I stepped outside, my hands shaking, the air thick with the weight of what I'd just learned. The red convertible wasn't just a symbol of my family's ruin. It was the bridge between two families bound by a secret and a betrayal that someone was still willing to bury in ash. Every secret eventually digs its own grave or hides under your floor. That night, I drove back to my mother's house, the one I grew up in, the one that had started to feel less like a home and more like a crime scene. The walls were lined with family photos that looked staged now, every smile rehearsed, every frame a piece of camouflage. I went straight to my old room. The same bed, the same wallpaper, the same silence. But there was something else I remembered. A hollow sound near the dresser. When I was a child, I used to hide my diaries there, beneath a loose floorboard that creaked differently than the rest. I knelt down and pried it open. Dust rose like ghosts. Beneath the board sat a small metal box, rusted around the corners with a keychain attached. The engraving caught the dim light. To the partner who stayed loyal. My pulse quickened. I lifted it out and set it on the bed. Inside, wrapped in brittle paper, were several documents, contracts, receipts, and a folded letterhead from a company I'd never heard of, Ellis Reed Holdings. The first page was a formal partnership agreement between Edward Ellis and Harold Reed, my father and Adam's grandfather. The date was 12 years before my father's death. Their signatures were side by side at the bottom, ink still dark and bold. But something wasn't right. I flipped through the rest. There were amendments, handwritten notes, and eventually, a final addendum stamped dissolution approved. The approval line had two signatures again. Harold Reed's and Valerie Ellis's, my mother's. I sat frozen. The air in the room thickened. She had co-signed the end of their company, the business my father built, the one that vanished the same year he did. I read through the fine print, trying to make sense of the legal language. The company had been dissolved due to irreconcilable differences between partners, but one clause stood out. All physical assets were transferred to the Reed family in exchange for a confidentiality settlement. Physical assets, the car. It wasn't a gift, it was a payoff. The floorboard creaked again behind me, and for a second I thought I heard footsteps. I turned, heart hammering, but no one was there. Just the echo of a home that had been keeping its silence too long. I looked down at the final page, where my mother's signature curved elegantly across the paper, sealing everything she'd spent years pretending to forget. She hadn't lost my father. She'd traded him. My stomach turned as the realization sank in. The accident hadn't just been a tragedy. It had been a transaction. I folded the papers carefully and placed them back in the box. My hands trembled, not from fear but from rage, because for the first time, I understood what she meant when she said the car had cost them one family. It was hers, and she'd used his to pay the debt. When lawyers knock, it's never for congratulations. 3 days after I found the box, I was still trying to piece the puzzle together. The ledger, the partnership, the car. Every thread I pulled only tightened the knot. I barely slept, barely ate. Then the doorbell rang. A woman stood on my porch, mid-50s, gray coat, steady eyes. She introduced herself as Marion Cole, an attorney. She spoke with the kind of calm that made bad news sound polite. I asked what she wanted. She said she represented the estate of Edward Ellis, my father. I almost laughed. My father's estate had been closed for years. Or so my mother had told me. Marion held out an envelope sealed with an old wax stamp. It was worn, but the handwriting was clear. Reclaim when married. My father's handwriting? She said she was the executor of a trust my father had established before he died, one that was never activated because my mother had legally blocked it. Valerie Ellis claimed her daughter was unfit to manage inherited assets. She'd told the court I was too emotional, too dependent, and that activating the trust would invite instability. In reality, she just didn't want me to have what my father left behind. Marion explained she'd been tracking my mother's motions for years. Once she saw the public marriage record, she decided it was time. The clause was simple, she said. Upon your lawful marriage, the trust is to be released in full. My hands shook as I took the envelope. The seal cracked softly, like it had been waiting for this moment. Inside was a thin folder, not money, not stocks, but a single sheet of paper. A property deed. It was for a garage on the north side of town. The title, Ellis Automotive Repair, my father's old shop. The address looked familiar. I realized why a moment later. It was the same location listed on the insurance document from the photographer's files. The same address where the red convertible had first been registered. Marion said my father made her promise to deliver the trust only when I was old enough to understand what ownership really meant. He believed I would come back for the truth. I asked her if she knew what happened to him. Her eyes softened. "I think you already do," she said. "But what you might not know is that the trust wasn't about wealth. It was about proof. He wanted you to have something they couldn't erase." When she left, I sat at the kitchen table with the deed in my hands. The name Edward Ellisis is printed in dark ink, still strong after all these years. Outside, the streetlight flickered against my car window, painting a streak of red across the paper. The same color as the convertible, the same color as my father's disappearance. I folded the deed and whispered to myself, almost afraid to believe it. He left me the garage, the place where it all began. The past still smelled like oil and betrayal. The garage my father left me sat at the edge of town, half swallowed by weeds and rust. The sign above the door was still there, Ellis Automotive, though most of the letters had fallen away. Only ELLI remained, like a name refusing to die. When I pushed open the door, a thick wave of dust and gasoline hit me. Sunlight bled through broken windows, catching on old tools and paint cans. The place hadn't changed. It looked frozen in time, like my father had stepped out for coffee and never came back. In the center of the room, under a half-torn tarp, sat the red convertible. The same car. My heart stopped. I walked toward it slowly, my shoes crunching over broken glass. The tarp peeled back like skin. The car gleamed as if someone had been caring for it all these years. Every curve, every chrome detail looked untouched by time. On the dashboard, a layer of dust framed something small, a bracelet. I picked it up carefully. The metal was cool, almost tender. The engraving read, "To my Nora, love Dad." My throat tightened. I slid the bracelet onto my wrist, the metal too small now, cutting slightly into my skin. For a second, I could almost hear his voice again, the one from the voicemail. "If they find out, it's over." I opened the glove compartment, hoping for another clue, but instead found something else. A second bracelet, identical in design but smaller. The engraving was different. V. Ploich, Valerie, and Harold. My mother, and Adam's grandfather. The realization hit like a punch. My parents hadn't just shared a business with the Reed family. They'd shared something else. Something intimate. Something that blurred loyalty and betrayal. I sat in the driver's seat, my pulse loud in my ears. The scent of old leather and gasoline filled the air. And for a moment, I felt like a child again, waiting for my father to take me for one last drive that never came. Then I saw it. The trunk release. My hands shook as I pulled it. The sound of the latch echoed across the empty garage, sharp and final. The trunk creaked open slowly, revealing a small metal lockbox wrapped in plastic. On top of it lay an envelope, sealed, edges yellowed with time. The handwriting was familiar. My father's. Across the front, it read, "Valerie and Harold, final payment enclosed." I stared at it, the letters blurring as my heartbeat thundered. The garage felt colder now, like the air itself was waiting. My fingers hovered over the envelope, the one thing that could finally answer everything, or destroy what little I still believed about the people who raised me. For the first time, I understood what my father meant when he said the car wasn't a gift. It was a witness. My wedding gift was a confession in chrome. I drove straight to my mother's house, the letter shaking in my hand the whole way. Rain had started again, soft at first, then relentless, like the sky itself was tired of keeping secrets. Valerie opened the door in her robe, calm as ever, her face painted with that same mask of control she'd worn my entire life. But when she saw the envelope in my hand, the one addressed to Valerie and Harold, final payment enclosed, her expression cracked for the first time. I didn't say a word. I just held it out. She stared at it for a long time before whispering, "You shouldn't have gone there." "I had to," I said. It was mine. Her hand trembled as she took the envelope, fingers tracing the handwriting like it was a ghost she'd hoped would stay buried. I could see her pulse in her throat. When she finally opened it, two things fell out, a folded check stub and a letter written in my father's steady hand. The check was made out to Harold Reed, $47,000. The memo line, "Debt settled, love unreturned." The letter was short, too short for a man's last words. My father had written that he was ending their business, paying Harold off, and walking away for good. He said he forgave Valerie but couldn't live under the weight of her silence anymore. I looked up at her. "Debt settled," I said. "What debt?" Valerie sat down on the edge of the couch, her robe slipping off one shoulder. "Your father wasn't supposed to see it," she said quietly. "The letters. The photographs." "What photographs?" She closed her eyes. Harold kept everything. Every message, every moment, I begged him to stop. Her voice broke. He blackmailed me, Nora. He said if I didn't make Edward dissolve the company, he'd ruin him. Expose the affair, the lies, the money. Your father would have lost everything. I felt my stomach twist. So you let him think you betrayed him? I let him hate me, she said. Because hate was easier than shame. She turned toward the window, her reflection trembling in the glass. When Harold died, I thought it was over. I froze. What do you mean, when Harold died? Her voice dropped to a whisper. The same day your father did. The words hung there like a curse. My father's car crash, the one labeled an accident. Harold Reed's heart attack was reported the same night. 2 deaths, 1 silence. I looked at her. The woman who had orchestrated an empire of lies just to preserve her image. You sold the car, I said. You buried the trust. You let everyone think it was a gift. She nodded weakly. Because it was easier than telling you the truth, that your father died trying to make me clean. I stepped back, breath trembling. The rain outside turned into thunder, rolling through the windows. That's when it hit me. The car wasn't just where the story started. It was where it ended, too. The place where she humiliated me would become the stage of her undoing. 2 weeks after the truth came crashing down, I called the same wedding hall that once echoed with applause over my mother's cruelty. The manager recognized my name immediately. I could hear the hesitation in his voice when I asked to rebook the ballroom for a family brunch. He didn't question it. He just said, "Same guests?" I smiled. Exactly the same. That morning, the hall looked eerily familiar. White linens, polished glass, the same chandeliers that once reflected my shame. But this time I wasn't wearing a gown. I was wearing armor, black blazer, a steady voice, a steady plan. Guests trickled in, confused but curious. My mother arrived last, looking radiant as ever, camera ready, expecting another celebration she could control. My husband, Adam, stood quietly at my side, unsure what I had planned. He'd seen pieces of the truth, but not the full picture. No one had. Then Marion Cole entered, briefcase in hand, expression sharp as a blade. My father's executor, my silent ally. When everyone was seated, I stepped to the microphone. The same one my mother had used when she announced her gift. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice calm. "The last time we gathered here, a car changed hands. Today we're giving something else back, the truth." The lights dimmed. Marion wheeled out a small projector and opened her case. On the screen appeared the first document, Edward Ellis's original trust. The one my mother silenced. Gasps echoed through the room as signatures appeared in glowing light. Edward's, Valerie's, and Harold Reed's. "This is the trust my father left behind," I continued. "It was meant to activate when I got married, but my mother prevented that, claiming I wasn't ready. The truth is, he wasn't." Whispers rippled across the crowd. Valerie's face drained of color. She stood abruptly. "This is enough, Nora. This isn't the place." "It's exactly the place," I said. "Right where you turned love into spectacle." Marion clicked to the next slide. The insurance documents, the bank draft, the letter marked debt settled, love unreturned. The words burned on the screen like they'd waited years to speak. Valerie's voice cracked. "Stop this, please." But I didn't. I walked to the projector, holding up my phone. "There's one more thing my father left behind." The room fell silent as I pressed play. His voice filled the ballroom, fragile, trembling, real. "Valerie, if they find out, it's over. The car isn't a gift, it's evidence." The words echoed off the marble, louder than applause, louder than guilt. Valerie's knees buckled. Someone reached to help her, but she pushed them away, tears streaking her makeup. For a moment the hall was frozen, the same chandeliers glinting above. But this time they reflected something different. Not pride, not wealth. Truth. And for the first time in years, my father's voice wasn't buried under her silence. It was heard. Her glass shattered before her voice did. The ballroom had gone completely silent, the kind of silence that swallows even breath. My father's voice was still echoing in the corners when the first sound of glass breaking cut through the air. My mother's champagne flute slipped from her trembling hand and exploded against the marble floor, gold bubbles running like tears. Every eye in the room turned toward her. The same guests who once applauded her cruelty now whispered behind their hands. Phones were raised discreetly, recording what looked less like a brunch and more like a reckoning. Valerie Ellis, the woman who had built her life on charm, poise, and polished lies, looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Her lipstick had smudged, her eyes were glassy, and her voice trembled when she said, "You don't understand, Nora. I did it for you." I stepped forward slowly, the microphone still in my hand. "You gave me away at my wedding," I said softly. "But this time I'm taking myself back." The crowd gasped, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. She shook her head, desperate. "You think exposing me will make you whole?" I met her eyes. "No, Mom, but it might make him rest." I gestured to the screen behind me, where my father's handwriting glowed. The words "debt settled, love unreturned." "You kept saying you protected me," I continued. "But you weren't protecting me. You were protecting your reflection." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The tears finally did. She looked down at the table nearest her, at the centerpiece she'd chosen, at the perfect white napkins, at the engraved glass she'd brought herself, the one that read to my daughter, 2012. She lifted it slowly, staring at the words as if seeing them for the first time. Then she whispered, "I loved him more than I should have." No one knew if she meant my father or Harold Reed. Maybe even she didn't. She set the glass down, turned, and took one last look at the crowd that had once adored her. Cameras flashed as she walked toward the exit. Each step echoed louder than the applause she used to crave. At the door, she stopped. Her hand trembled as she reached into her clutch and pulled something out, a small set of keys, faded and familiar. She placed them on the nearest table without a word. The red car keys, the same ones she once used to humiliate me in front of these people. They lay there in the light, glinting like confession. The doors closed behind her, leaving the hall half-lit, half-broken. I stood there staring at those keys, the sound of her footsteps fading, the last remnants of her empire collapsing under the weight of the truth. And as the guests began to rise in stunned silence, I realized that this right here was the real toast she never finished. I used to think family was a destination. Now I know it's a detour. The sky was the same color it had been the day my father died. That deep, bruised orange that looks like fire learning to forgive. I drove with the top down, the wind tangling my hair, the red convertible humming beneath me like a heartbeat I'd borrowed from the past. The road curved along the coast, the same route he took on his last drive. I'd avoided it my whole life, afraid of what it might make me remember. But now, it felt different, lighter, like the ghosts were finally letting go. In the passenger seat sat the bracelet I'd found in the garage, the one that said to my Nora, love, Dad. I ran my thumb over the engraving, the metal warm from the sun. For years, I chased closure like it was something I could inherit, like truth would arrive wrapped in ribbon. But closure isn't found, it's built. 1 mile, one truth, one act of courage at a time. I thought of my mother. Somewhere she was probably packing, leaving the city she'd ruled with her smile. I wasn't angry anymore, just empty in a way that felt peaceful. Maybe that was forgiveness. Not forgetting, not excusing, just finally letting the weight slide off your shoulders. The ocean shimmered beside me, endless and indifferent. My father used to say that the sea kept secrets better than people did. Now I knew he was wrong. Secrets don't stay buried forever. They just wait for someone brave enough to dig. As I slowed near the cliff, and the spot where the crash had happened, the air grew still. I pulled over, engine idling, the horizon stretching wide and gold. I placed the bracelet on the passenger seat and whispered, "Debt settled, Dad." The words felt final. Not like surrender, but like release. For the first time, I wasn't the girl humiliated at her own wedding. I wasn't the daughter defined by her mother's lies or her father's absence. I was just Nora L., driving the car that once carried betrayal, now carrying peace. I pressed the accelerator gently, letting the car roll forward, wind filling the space where silence used to live. In the rearview mirror, the sunset flared, a soft blaze of gold and red, and for a brief, perfect moment, I saw both of them there. My father's reflection in the light, my mother's voice in the echo of the wind. Then they were gone. I smiled through the tears and turned up the road, back toward whatever came next. Because dignity isn't something you're given. It's what you rebuild when love turns into leverage. If this story struck a chord, subscribe for more tales of truth, family, and redemption. Tell us where you're watching from. Your story matters too.